All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Kyle Anzalone Show. It has been a really horrific weekend, and so I want to spend some time on today's show talking about a lot of what's going on in the world, getting into some foreign policy stuff as well. But there is a lot of really important events unfolding as we head into this year's Christmas season. And like I said, a really tragic weekend. A couple things to recap. So starting off, Netanyahu blaming Australia, Americans killed by Syrian allies. Bari Weiss sits down with Erika Kirk, and Chuck Schumer has a new bill that's quite disturbing. So to kind of start off here, recapping this past weekend, there was, of course, the shooting at Brown University, where the suspect is still at large. Two people killed in that one. There was the murder of Ron Reiner and his wife. The reports are that the son has been arrested and is believed to be the person behind that. So that's absolutely horrific. And now President Donald Trump has said that, Rob Reiner died because of his Trump derangements syndrome. It took this really, really obnoxious stand on the murder of the director. So that's going to be getting a lot of headlines and attention. But of course, we also had the terror attack in Australia, where a father and son team of terrorists opened fire with rifles on it's in a Jewish community of Sydney. I guess it's like the highest, most densely populated area of Sydney by Jews, and they were holding a Hanukkah celebration on the beach, and these two men opened fire, killed at least 15 people. I've heard the death toll could still rise, that there's some people who are really in bad shape, and of course, likely some people will never recover fully from their injuries. And so they took an awful lot of lives with that attack, and it was really horrific. I've seen people already floating the idea that this was some kind of false flag. There's really good video, and I don't mean good, I just mean clear, easy to see what happens, of the father and son as they are firing. They appear very proficient with their weapons. They were obviously able to kill a lot of people in a short period of time. That's something that's not necessarily easy to do if you don't really know how to shoot a rifle. So I think there could be some questions as to if these two had any military training, or what kind of ties they had with any kind of terrorist groups, or foreign support from other governments or other groups in other countries. So, there are maybe some valid questions there, but the idea that this wasn't two people legitimately driven by their hatred of Jews to go out and kill people on a day that should be a celebration for the Jewish people, I do think that is the case from some pretty clear video evidence and other statements and things like that. Now, I guess an important and noteworthy part of the whole saga, of course, is one very brave man actually ran and tackled one of the shooters, and I'm sure saved quite a few lives in doing so. And that man was also a Muslim. And so, for anybody who's trying to overgeneralize here on Muslims and their feeling towards Jews, just understand that one of the first people to act and save the lives of a lot of Jewish people that day was a Muslim. And so, there is that important nuance to this whole story. But I want to get into what Benjamin Netanyahu said following the attack. It was quite disturbing how he immediately tries to capitalize on it to promote the narrative of Israel. So let's play this first clip.
On August 17th, about 4 months ago, I sent Prime Minister Albanese of Australia a letter in which I gave him warning that the Australian government's policy was promoting and encouraging anti-Semitism in Australia. I wrote, "Your call for a Palestinian state pours fuel on the anti-Semitic fire."
All right, so pause it there.
Hamas
Let's really take a second to talk about what he just said here. He says the Australian Prime Minister fueled on the anti-Semitic fire in Australia with his policies. And he leaves a nice long pregnant pause, so people start to think in their minds, oh, he must have removed some legislation that targeted anti-Semites, or said something really bad about the state of Israel. And then Netanyahu's next words are, he said that there should be a state of Palestine. Right? He is equating anybody advocating for rights for the Palestinians with being anti-Semitic, right? And it's not right. He's equating the entire situation with Jews and the targeting that they face around the world with his policy goals. Absolutely insane. Let's keep playing the clip.
It emboldens those who menace Australian Jews and encourages the Jew hatred now stalking your streets. Anti-Semitism is a cancer. It spreads when leaders stay silent. It retreats when leaders act. I call upon you to replace weakness with action, appeasement with resolve. Instead, Prime Minister, you replaced weakness with weakness and appeasement with more appeasement. Your government did nothing to stop the spread of anti-Semitism in Australia. You did nothing to curb the cancer cells that were growing inside your country. You took no action. You let the disease spread. And the result is the horrific attacks on Jews we saw today. We saw an action of a brave man, turns out a Muslim brave man, and I salute him, that stopped one of these terrorists from killing innocent Jews. But it requires the action of your government, which you're not taking. And you have to, because history will not forgive hesitation and weakness. It will honor action and strength. That's what Israel expects of each of your governments in the West and elsewhere.
All right, so we could be done with the Netanyahu clip there. He goes on, but the real point of what he's trying to do here is equate anti-Semitism with the state of Israel. So anybody who objects to Israel's policy goals, no matter how horrific they are, right? And I read this story just today to know how I guess severe the apartheid system in the West Bank is, and just how awful the Israelis and the Israeli government are willing to treat the Palestinians. The Israeli government approved a measure that's going to take $68 million out of funds that build community centers in Gaza, run healthcare centers, build other infrastructure that helps civilian life, and they're going to give that to the Shin Bet and the Israeli police. And so it's just completely absurd, right? Of what's going on in Israel. Like, this is a full-on apartheid system that Israel has already conducted and is the middle of conducting a genocide in Gaza. And he's saying that anybody who opposes that, anybody who says that we should have a Palestinian state, is anti-Semitic. And look, I am not in any way blaming Netanyahu, like, personally, for the actions of those terrorists. I'm sure he had no connections to those people whatsoever. He didn't fund them, arm them, train them, order the Mossad to do so in any way. However, this kind of rhetoric, equating all Jews in the world with the state of Israel, while Israel is conducting a genocide, is going to endanger the lives of Jews around the world. It's not necessarily fair to the innocent Jews living around the world. That is the dynamic here. But you have this very powerful man on the world stage, claiming that he speaks for all Jews, and that all Jews say we cannot have the creation of a Palestinian state. And if you believe that, you're anti-Semitic. This is going to drive people crazy. This is going to make people anti-Semitic. This allows for more fertile ground for people like Nick Fuentes to say openly anti-Semitic things, because you've equated opposing genocide with anti-Semitism. And so now the word means absolutely nothing to anyone. So that's the situation that Netanyahu creates. And then he blames Anthony Albanese, the Australian Prime Minister, and look, the Australian government condemns anti-Semitism. They've condemned October 7th. It's not as if they welcome Hamas or support Hamas. They simply looked at the situation in Gaza and were so horrified by it and Israel's continued steps to annex the West Bank that they said no more. We can't have this, and we're going to have the creation of a Palestinian state. And that's what Netanyahu is claiming is anti-Semitic. All right, so next up here, I need to also talk about this situation in Syria, adding to all the horrific things that happened all over the weekend. On Saturday, two American soldiers, I believe they turned out to be Iowa National Guardsmen, and this should be another call to pass defend the guard legislation that would prevent these kind of deployments. But two Iowa National Guardmen and an interpreter were killed near Palmyra, Syria, when a gunman opened fire. And so I want to go ahead and play Trump's initial response to this terrorist attack in Syria.
So we mourn the loss of three great patriots in Syria. You know how it happened. There was an ambush, terrible. We also have three wounded. They seem to be doing pretty well. So we mourn the loss. These are three great people. And it's just a terrible thing. Syria, by the way, was fighting along with us. The new president of Syria is, as they told me, and I'm not surprised, he's devastated by what happened. This was an ISIS attack on us and Syria. And again, we mourn the loss and we pray for them and their parents and their loved ones. Very, very sad.
Mr. President, will the U.S. retaliate against ISIS?
Yeah, we will.
And should U.S. forces are attacked again?
You're going to be seeing.
And should the U.S. still be
We will retaliate. Thank you very much.
So, in the end, you got Trump being Trump. But the important thing, the reason I want to play that clip, what he says in there, that ISIS carried out this attack and the Syrian president is devastated and he feels really bad about it. So let's get into who the actual gunman who killed the three Americans is. I wrote this article yesterday at the Libertarian Institute. Report Syrian soldier, not ISIS, responsible for attack that killed Americans. And so what happened was, again, Trump makes that initial statement, and then we have that narrative later disputed by Damascus. The Syrian interior minister said that a member of the security forces conducted the attack. The ministry claimed the man was sent to be fired on Sunday for extremist Islamist ideas. Now, they go on to say, oh, the reason we didn't fire him sooner is because there was a holiday and it was a lot of paperwork. So, we kind of just we're running late at the office and couldn't get to it. And so that's why he didn't get fired ahead of time. But I think that's really them trying to cover up for what happened during this attack. So the AFP spoke with a Syrian source who said the gunman was in the military for more than 10 months and was posted to several cities before being transferred to Palmyra. And Palestinian journalist Wal Assam, who is a pretty good reporter on Syrian matters, says that the shooter is Tariq Safu al-Hamd, and he joined ISIS in 2024, then became a member of the security forces of Idlib. Idlib was run by HTS until the group overthrew President Bashar al-Assad last year. The leader of HTS, Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, seized power in Damascus. So I know there's a lot of Syrian names there, but I really want to break all this down. This guy, again, was a member of ISIS, but then he went and joined HTS as it was becoming the Syrian security forces. So, maybe not an actual member of the outright Syrian military, but working with a gun, doing the jobs of a soldier for the Syrian government, right? And the Syrian government is now led by an al-Qaeda terrorist. He says that he's reformed, that he's given up his jihadism, but he fought against the United States during the Iraq War. He himself was formerly a deputy commander in the Islamic State before he broke off and formed al-Qaeda's Syrian affiliate in Al-Qaeda Syria affiliate. And by the way, when he broke off official ties with Al-Qaeda leadership, he did so under the idea that this would better help his organization, which he had then rebranded into HTS, get arms and support from the Americans. This wasn't a real ideological change. It was a rebrand, something that the man who now goes by Ahmed al-Shara seems to understand really well, how he could change his image, change the name of his organization, say he's reformed, and then somehow get more support from the Americans. It's something he's played out time and time again. And so this is really, really important here to understand that we have an Al Qaeda president of Syria, a member of his military, open fire on U.S. forces, and the president thinks he feels really bad about it. I think we have to raise a lot of questions here about Al Shara or Jolani, and maybe if he's not necessarily authorizing these, certainly looking the other way. All right. I guess the other thing I'll mention here is just we need to get out of Syria. Our troops should never be there. They should have never been there in the first place. The initial reason for the US invasion of Syria was to take on the Islamic State, which only rose to power predicted by Michael Flynn, who is not a genius, but was Obama's director of national intelligence at the time. He said the CIA's Timber Sycamore program, run by Obama's ogre John Brennan, was actually going to cause the rise of the Islamic Caliphate, which ended up happening. And once it did, Obama said, "Oh, we have to go invade Syria to stop it." And then, after the Islamic State was defeated by Donald Trump in the first half of his first administration, he ordered U.S. troops out of Syria. But people kept telling him, "No, you had to stay for this reason. No, you had to stay for that reason." And the president just allowed the U.S. occupation to go on. It went on through the Biden administration under claims that we had to protect the Kurds, we had to curb Iranian influence, we had to enforce sanctions on Assad. It was really aimed at bringing down the Assad government. And then once the Assad government fell in 2024, in the pretext that this is Iranian influence, that this is about taking on Assad, is now completely gone. We have embraced the Syrian government, and so if we've done so, they must not be genocidal lunatics who will go kill our Kurdish friends, and so we should be able to leave. Yet U.S. troops are still there, being put in harm's way every single day, completely unnecessary, to no benefit of the Americans whatsoever. And in fact, we're going to increase our troop presence in Syria soon. We're looking at establishing a similar CMCC. We have one outside Gaza to monitor the ceasefire there. So they want to set up one in Damascus to monitor an Israeli ceasefire with the Syrian government, which will probably look a lot like the one in Gaza and Lebanon, where Israel violates it every single day. But we could put 200 troops somewhere in Damascus where there's a whole bunch of these same lunatics, like the man who just killed 3 Americans. And this is a recipe for getting more American soldiers killed. I really don't want this to be the case. I don't want Americans to be in harm's way overseas, but that is the position that our government, our commander in chief, for president after president after president, has put U.S. soldiers in. All right, so want to switch it up a little bit here, and there was this pretty big interview that happened. I think it was recorded last week and then published on Saturday by CBS. The new editor in chief there, Bari Weiss, sat down with the widow of Charlie Kirk to discuss a wide range of issues. And so I just want to play a short clip from it and then give my thoughts on that in Candace Owens and other related issues. So let's go ahead and roll the clip.
And yet there are a huge number of conspiracy theories, you might call them brain rot, that are spreading right now online about the actual story behind the reality. One, people say that Tyler Robinson was actually a MAGA Republican. Or two, some people say you were actually a Mossad agent sitting in front of me, and you were Charlie's handler, and Israel killed Charlie. Right. Other people say that a number of men in the crowd were wearing maroon T-shirts, and this signifies that his killing was an elite airborne operation, whatever that means. They say that the rings on your fingers, which are
my kids'
initials,
my wedding band, the Medal of Freedom, my engagement ring.
But apparently they symbolize some kind of secret plot. There's also a new theory that Egyptian aircraft have been tracking you.
Mm-hmm.
What is going on? Why are there so many conspiracies spreading about what seems to be a pretty open and shut case?
So let's pause it there. And I kind of want to mention this because what Bari Weiss does here is really dishonest. I think a lot of the questions that people have surrounding the Charlie Kirk assassination originate from some things that really don't seem to make sense, like what gun was actually used. It seems like a 30-06 would cause a lot more damage. We heard the explanation from Turning Point USA that Charlie just had really strong bones. And obviously nobody believes this. And so the truth is different from the official narrative. Maybe Tyler Robinson really did just kill Charlie Kirk. I think that's entirely possible. I haven't, like, saw any evidence to suggest any other person is behind the attack. And that's but that being said, there are a lot of inconsistencies or problems with the official narrative that we gotten, and people raising questions about that is largely a result of us not getting satisfactory answers on essentially any major crime that's happened in the United States in recent decades, from 9/11 to the Trump assassination attempts. I mean, hell, even people don't believe we get the official narrative on JFK and other major assassinations. And so the American people are already looking for alternatives. And then when presented with situations that really don't make sense, like how quickly he could have reassembled the gun, how he got on and off the roof without being spotted, how he was able to get away for some time, how Kash Patel, the FBI director, had announced they had actually caught the shooter, and then that was actually the wrong person. And you could go on and on and on. The text messages with the roommates, how he turned himself in and then pleaded not guilty. So there are a lot of real questions that people rightfully have about this. But Bari Weiss lines up pretty much a full slate of the most absurd claims that anyone has made, and mixes a couple of Candace's Owens in there, because the goal is to make all of Candace Owens reporting on the Charlie Kirk assassination to be completely false. And as far as I will say, I've watched all of Candace's Owens coverage on this. Actually, I think she's a very talented YouTuber, content creator, and I see what she's doing and how successful she is, and so I want to watch and see how she does it, because she really does a phenomenal job of presenting what she thinks is the story or lead she's following, things like that. I have found that most of what she has suggested, she hasn't presented the evidence for. Doesn't mean she's wrong, but she hasn't presented the evidence for it. And so I don't see any of her theories yet panning out, or the potential, and some of them seem contradictory even to me. And so her narrative around this, I'm still a little confused by. But she did do a very good job right after the Charlie Kirk assassination. She had facts and evidence. She was able to, as they say, bring the receipts. When people tried to say that Charlie Kirk was like the most loyal supporter of Israel ever, never questioned Israel, never had concerns about what Israel was doing in Gaza or how that impacted the movement that he was trying to have in the Republican Party. And she was able to show through text messages and statements that he said to other people that no, in fact, Charlie Kirk did question the U.S. ties with Israel, the war in Iran this summer. And so she was right about something at first. Now, I think sometimes this happens to people where they get something like this right, and then maybe they get a little overconfident in their sources or themselves, and they start to pursue narratives that aren't the case. And maybe that's what happened to Candace here. But the goal of this whole interview was to discredit Candace, but also anybody who raises any questions about the official narrative. And unlike Bari Weiss says, this really isn't an open and shut case. He has pled not guilty, which he's saying that he didn't do it. Maybe that's for leverage. There's genuine questions that people have about all of this that still need to be answered, and all of those can't be dismissed. They also use this interview to really promote the Israeli narrative on everything, which again, I don't know if Charlie Kirk was a committed Zionist, right? The fact that he questioned some things Israel was doing on the edges doesn't mean he wasn't a Zionist and supporter of the state of Israel. But the way that Erika embraces Israel and promotes Israel in this interview does seem to be something of dismissing the questions of her former husband. So before we wrap up here, I want to talk about this new bill from Chuck Schumer. This is S. Res 533, which Judge Schumer has titled the Condemning White Supremacy, Hate, and Anti-Semitism and Efforts to Give Platforms to Those Dangerous Ideologies. So this is absolutely insane that we now have, while not a bill, a resolution, but a resolution in the Senate condemning someone for platforming someone else. So in this legislation, if we could pull it back up, Schumer writes, whereas Nick Fuentes is a white supremacist leader, organizer, and podcaster, whereas Fuentes has stated that Hamas terrorist attacks against Israel on October 7th were staged, and he denies acts of rape and the killing of babies by Hamas. And then whereas Tucker Carlson did not push back or reject claims made by Fuentes doing the interview and platform the views of Fuentes, at times even validating his framing. So I really want to break a lot of this down. I think this is a major attack on free speech. And I'm trying to think of another time that Congress actually introduced a resolution condemning a specific interview. Right? They are going after Tucker Carlson for sitting down and talking with Nick Fuentes in an actual piece of legislation. So one major inaccuracy in Schumer's bill that should be pointed out is he says that Fuentes denied the acts of rape and killing of babies of Hamas, which in fact did not happen. There is no evidence that anyone was raped on October 7th. I think the UN has said that there's maybe some evidence that would suggest some people may have been sexually assaulted, although this evidence seems somewhat at least open to interpretation still, such as, like, people were found with some clothes removed, which, if they're fleeing from a music festival in the middle of the night, that there could be multiple causes for that, not necessarily just that Hamas had taken the shirts off of women or something like that. But the dead babies claim also has been debunked. There was, I believe, just one baby killed on October 7th by Hamas, and that's absolutely horrific that happened. But at the same time, that is not the narrative that Judge Schumer is putting forward here. So he's getting the facts wrong in his actual legislation, which is something that's going to be capitalized on by Nick Fuentes to promote some of his actual anti-Semitic views. Now, the part of Schumer's legislation, which is really disturbing, is that he's going after Tucker for platforming Fuentes and not pushing back. But Tucker did push back on Fuentes, particularly when it came to anti-Semitism. He said that you cannot hate people based on an identity that they were born with. And so he's saying that, the idea of blood guilt is evil, the idea that you would hate somebody because they're Jewish or black or Latin, the very thing that Schumer is trying to condemn in this bill, Tucker actually did to Fuentes. And as I've tried to point out to people, the way Tucker approached this is the best way, right? You're not necessarily, when you sit down with Nick Fuentes, trying to convince Nick Fuentes to no longer say Hitler's a good guy, the Holocaust didn't happen, or Jews are bad, right? And referring to Jews as a group. I think he said something like, at one point in time, if most black people in this country were locked up, it would be a better place. You're not necessarily trying to get Nick to move away from those positions. You're trying to show his audience a different direction, a different position. You're trying to win them over, not Nick himself, because he's got a massive audience. He's gaining momentum. And so we do need to win those people over. I mean, it would be great if Nick would completely change his mind and renounce it. But even doing so, a lot of members of his audience are just going to say, oh, he's been bought off by the Israel lobby, or, he's weak now, and they're going to continue to hold their same viewpoints. You need to have a conversation with those people. And so if you're antagonistic, if you're confrontational with Fuentes like Piers Morgan was, that's a realm that Nick does very well in. he's very good at being sarcastic and appealing to his audience. And then later he could always go back and say, the most provocative things I said, that was more just a joke. I really don't love Hitler. Who loves Hitler? He'll walk back some of that more extreme rhetoric, but at the time, him and his audience will think it's great that he's triggering Piers Morgan. And his audience also knows that Piers Morgan's interviews people all the time that have done far more damage than Nick Fuentes has or probably ever will. That all these people who promoted the Iraq war and the people who ruined everybody is, economic prospects in this country. The people who Fuentes feels to are the people who feel so disenfranchised by the American system that they think it's funny when somebody goes on Piers Morgan or any of these mainstream shows, and as they see it, triggers the boomer host by saying good things about the Holocaust or bad things about the Jews or women or black people and things like that. And so that's, kind of the game at hand here. And Tucker Carlson navigated it actually very well in a way where he wasn't confrontational. He didn't provoke Nick. He didn't trigger Nick. He allowed Nick to express his viewpoint. And then Tucker tried to appeal to these people, knowing that a lot of them are kind of identifying as Christian nationalists, to say, like, Christianity doesn't hold these viewpoints. And another part and another thing I want to bring up with Schumer's legislation is that he's really trying to conflate Nick with Tucker and playing the same game where they're trying to make the argument between themselves and Fuentes and say everybody who stands opposed to Israel is under the Fuentes umbrella. And so we could just take on what he has to say, and then they could scream and say, oh, he's an anti Semite. Look how horrible he is. He said positive things about Hitler. And then you're just supposed to assume that means Tucker Carlson and Dave Smith, Candace Owens, and everybody else has made this similar statements, which isn't the case. The problem is that these idiots are actually losing the debate to Nick Fuentes right now, and that is giving him more power and popularity in this country. And so it's really important for all of us to make ourselves a part of this conversation, to make it clear that the debate isn't between Schumer, Piers Morgan, in the US establishment and the elite class against Nick Fuentes. It's, kind of all of us normal people, and then we're advocating for positions that help the American people against the elites. And Nick is, a separate voice, and he could have his voice, but I think we could take from his audience that we could stop his momentum and direct it in a much more positive way for the country if we, make ourselves a part of the conversation and don't allow Mark Levin and Chuck Schumer and Netanyahu and Trump and Rubio and all the others to make this about, oh, you're either in the establishment camp or you're in the Fuentes camp, because that's a real trick they're trying to use right now to shift the Overton window to try to make it as you can't, just like kind of we started this show, if you're in any way opposed to what Israel is doing, you're an anti-Semite. All right, everybody, that will do for the show today. I really appreciate everybody for tuning in. I saw the chat was very active. I do go back and look at comments afterwards, so always let me know what you think, any guests that you would like me to have on the show, topics that you want me to cover. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future episodes. This Wednesday, 4:45, the great Kelly Vallejos returns to the show. We will have a ton to talk about. She's been writing some really important articles and was just at the Dawa Forum in Qatar. So she has a lot of really important insights into what's kind of happening on the world stage that she's going to share with us. And then wherever you're listening, just subscribe, share the show, and we'll be back with another episode soon. Thanks, everyone.